Need your daily fix of women's mixed martial arts? From the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and One Championship. Be in the loop, because Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your fix on women's MMA. We've got you covered on Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, now, thank you for tuning into the GSMC Women's Mixed Martial Arts Podcast. I'm your host, Tate, and of course, I have my favorite co-host.
I'm Sarah, but am I really your favorite? I mean, I haven't seen you since like 1972.
I know, we have not done a show in a long time.
But
The
last show was just you and Will, because I wasn't around. And thankfully, because, then I wouldn't have to berate you on air for the bet that you lost.
Just to give a little flashback, which shows how long we haven't had a show.
Talked about your loss.
Hey, did I not knock out my 150 push-ups?
You did. I got to give you credit
I owned
for that.
up to my bet. I did my push-ups. And I'm done betting against Cyborg. Cyborg, I love you. You're amazing, but you made me do push-ups.
And you survived, so.
Yeah, so today, we got a pretty full day today. We're actually going to have a full episode. And the nice thing about it is that we are going to start back doing episodes on a regular basis, which is kind of cool. So I get to see a lot more of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I know you missed me.
Excellent. Okay, so today we are going to be covering the big press conference that happened this past weekend, in which the UFC announced their main event and co-main event for UFC 220, UFC 223, and for this show, when we're talking about the press conference, what was the big announcement?
Well, clearly they wanted to give me a gift for my birthday because it's April 7th, and that's right before my birthday. And they announced the rematch between Joanna and Rose.
So, Joanna Jedrzejczyk versus Thug Rose Namajunas. So, that's actually going to be an interesting one there.
Yes.
We're also going to talk about a lot of talk about in the second segment. Speaking of Cyborg and me doing push-ups, that the whole concept of Cyborg versus Amanda Nunes could actually happen.
Mm-hmm.
And what are we going to cover the rest of the way?
Well, for the third segment, we'll go back to that UFC 223 that where Rose and Joanna will be having their rematch, but also Felice Herrig and Karolina Kowalkiewicz will be facing off on that night. And then in the fourth segment, we have something a little different, something we haven't really done before. We were contacted by an author who's written a book about the history of women's MMA in Britain. And so we spoke with him today, and we're
super nice guy.
Yeah,
I really liked him.
Really awesome.
Love
guy.
the book as well.
The book's called The Fight Game, just so I can get that in there while I'm thinking about it.
Right.
And we're gonna have that interview in the fourth segment and talk more about that book.
You know, we could have talked to him a lot longer.
We
had all kind of technical
if
difficulties.
Skype didn't hate us.
Skype truly hated us on this one.
I don't know what was going on. We had massive technical difficulties. And so, Alistair, we apologize to you because, wow.
So that will be our final segment. Mm-hmm. So let's jump right into this.
All right.
So as we started off by saying, Dana White and the UFC announced that Joanna Jedrzejczyk and Rose is going to be fighting again. Mm-hmm. What did you think when you heard that?
I'm happy. I mean, I knew it was coming, or I guess I didn't know. You can't really know for sure, but I assumed it was coming. It's coming in April, so I hadn't really thought about the timeline. That's not that far out, but far enough to, give them both time to train, etc. I did see a quote from Rose where she was talking about how they were going to go in, and she had a great game plan for the first time they fought, but she doesn't want to repeat that. But then she doesn't also doesn't want to reinvent the wheel. I'm not quoting here. I'm just kind of paraphrasing what she said. She doesn't really want to reinvent the wheel and try something.
Say like repaint the Mona Lisa again or something like that.
Well, she said you can't paint the Mona Lisa twice, is what I think she said. So she doesn't want to do the exact same thing.
That's called photocopy. Hey, listen, if I figure out a way to win a fight, I'm gonna keep using that one. I'm just gonna start making copies.
Don't you think that Joanna's gonna expect that copy this time?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why I'm super excited about this fight. After this fight, when you start learning a little bit more about what kind of happened, and Joanna had this horrible, horrible situation with the weight cut. Matter of fact, she's working with a new team, dealing with her nutrition and handling her with the weight cut. And, I'm not trying to make an excuse for Joanna, but I'm telling you, a weight cut can really change a fight. It's one of the, especially early on in the fight, it's one of the biggest factors for a fight. You got to be prepared. You got to be mentally prepared. But you also have to have a good weight cut. If you don't have that weight cut, it affects your brain. It affects the way you think. It affects your stamina. It affects how you can handle a shot. And I have to say, that last fight, it didn't seem like Joanna was her normal self. Do you agree?
I agree. It really didn't seem like it was Joanna at all once she got in the ring. It seemed like her up until she got in the ring,
Yeah, but it just did not seem like her. And so I'm very curious to see how things go. As far as Rose goes, I don't, when you talk about not painting the Mona Lisa, Rose took her out so fast that I don't really think it ever showed her game plan. So talking about doing a totally different game plan when your last game plan didn't even get to be really seen, if it's not broke, don't try to fix it. I think you got to go in there and be more prepared. Rose is a very tough woman with very heavy hands. And who knows, the same result could happen again. I just say, it's just one of those things where looking at this fight, this is a fight I am truly looking forward to. Another thing, and what else? Do you have anything else you want to add to it?
I was just going to ask if you have a prediction. Because, a prediction. Notice that I'm not asking you to bet me.
No, I'm not betting. But actually,
because I don't want to do push-ups, thank you very much. I'll make you a bet, and whoever wins gets to eat chocolate.
No, I'm going to pass on all of
that.
Come on! Now, I'm sorry. When I look at this, and I've been a big Rose fan, from even the Ultimate Fighter days, I was shocked that she wasn't the very first strawweight champion when she lost to Carla Esparza in the finals. But I think mentally, Joanna Jedrzejczyk is just mentally one of the strongest women I have ever met, or forget about women, strongest fighters I've ever met mentally. One of the things that I like about her, I'm more impressed by Joanna after losing her title than when she was champ, and I was super impressed. But you look at her, and she's enjoying life even after losing the title. A lot of people, when they lose the title or they lose a big match, they disappear. Ronda Rousey just disappeared off the planet. But Joanna, you see her, she's running with the Olympic torch. She's out doing all these fun things. She's living her life and she's having a blast. And I always respected that. That shows mentally how strong she is. What do you think?
No, I agree. I think she's done really well in terms of not disappearing, not making a bunch of excuses, not, doing any number of things that she could do in this situation. I think she's been pretty classy about the whole thing, just kind of going back to her life and saying, this is what happened, and we'll have our rematch, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I look at this one. I'm going to tell you, I mean, when I start breaking this fight down, I think it's really, really important that Rose use the same strategy she had before. One of the things I've always noticed, and as a matter of fact, you and I earlier today when we were getting ready for the interview for the gentleman that wrote the book, we were looking at some of the British fighters that he had covered in the book, and it was kind of funny. Joanna had fought a lot of them and had annihilated a lot of them.
Yeah.
And even when you go back to her Cage Warriors days, one of the things is Joanna is a slow starter. You can catch Joanna early, and that's exactly what happened with Rose. Rose was able to catch Joanna early, tag her, and finish her. And I think you cannot change that game plan, because if Joanna does not get caught early, I think it's one of those situations where she gets in a rhythm. She starts throwing her combinations. If Joanna gets in a rhythm, I don't think there's any woman in mixed martial arts that can handle her. Once Joanna starts rolling, she's rolling.
I agree, and I was kind of laughing when we were watching some of those fights. She wasn't well known. She wasn't in the UFC yet. The commentators kept just marveling, and one kept saying, "Oh my gosh, if you are 115 pounds, run, do not fight this woman." And they didn't really know who she was, but they were like, "Do not fight this woman." You know what, though?
You don't have to call him Nostradamus, but if you go back and you look at some of her Cage Warrior fights, she's an unstoppable force. She's not remotely as polished as she is now. But she was an unstoppable force then, and she's just been moving on from that point. Pretty much until Thug Rose got a hold of her, I didn't think anyone could even get close to her. Now, what do you see as the keys to Rose retaining her title? First off, who do you have winning it, and how?
Oh, goodness. Well, I feel like this might actually make Joanna an even better fighter, if that's possible. She was a great fighter before, but now she's been beaten. So she's kind of gotten over that hurdle, if that makes sense. So she's going to come back even more determined. So if she can get past those first few minutes where as you rightly point out, she can be stopped, then I think
I don't know if she, even though she was stopped, I don't know if I'm saying she can be stopped. I just noticed that if she's going to get hit with a solid shot, as most times I notice kind of early in the fight.
Right. As for Rose, I think she just needs to come back in with the confidence that she showed in the first fight, not letting Joanna get to her, because Joanna is really good at, trying to get in her opponent's heads. So Rose just needs to maintain that calm facade and go in and do what she, maybe not the exact same plan she had for the first fight, but pretty much slight variations on that, because as you said, it ended quickly. We didn't see the whole game plan. I think they probably had a pretty solid game plan. So.
Now here's the thing. It's the tough thing about winning the fight. There's one thing you could build. It could give you a lot more confidence, but it can also be a curse. And that's one of the things I'm trying to figure out is.
Well, you always say that being champion is a lot tougher, because then you've got different time constraints, you've got different demands on your time.
Absolutely. This time around, Rose won't be able to just sit around and just be the stone face. She's going to have to do a lot more press with this fight. She's going to have to answer a lot more questions, where Joanna is very, equipped to handle. Not to mention that now you are the hunted. You have the title, and are you going to start out? A lot of times when you have something to lose, you tend to be a little tighter. Are you? Or will Rose be a little tighter early on in the fight? If she is tight early in the fight, then that's another reason why I take Joanna over her, is because there's a lot for Rose to, one, she wants to hold on to the belt. Two, she wants to show that this was not a fluke. This was, that she is the real deal and she is the real champion. And so that early jitters is that's the early part of this fight is when it's going to tell a lot to me on what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
All right. So that concludes this segment. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, what are we going to talk about?
We are going to talk about Cyborg, of course, because she is always interesting. She's always doing
Cyborg-rific.
So she is talking about fighting Amanda Nunes, and she has thoughts because, of course, she does. She's nothing if not opinionated. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
With that, we will be right back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA, from the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and One Championship. We got the fights covered. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, we're back. And the last segment, Sarah and I were just talking about the
Joanna
announcement.
and Rose.
Oh, that's right. Thank you very much.
I just thought I'd jump in there and interrupt you.
No, not a problem. So Joanna and Rose are scheduled to be fighting on the undercard of Stipe. No, it's not Stipe, is it?
It's isn't it Tony Ferguson? And
Khabib? I'm so caught up on that Stipe and Daniel Cormier fight. I'm totally skipping over Khabib and Tony Ferguson, which is an amazing card there as well. But I slipped up and said Stipe and not Khabib, Tony Ferguson. So what do we? So as we move on.
So now we're moving on to Cyborg, and Cyborg, as I said before the break, is nothing if not interesting. She always has thoughts. If you follow her on Twitter, you always see what she is thinking by her Twitter handle. So now she always changes her name. I mean, her Twitter handle never changes, of course, because that's how you find her. But she always changes her name to reflect what event she sees herself in next.
Oh, really? I've followed Cyborg on Twitter forever and never even noticed that.
Oh, you should pay attention because she changes it for whatever. It's fight specific.
Now, one of the things when you talk about her, and I sometimes wonder, I don't think she really handles her own social media. I think she has a company or someone designated, because sometimes when I look at some of her posts, I scratch my head and I say, that doesn't seem like Cyborg. But
I feel like even if somebody else does the majority of it, she has a big say in what happens on her social media. Because I would agree. She controls her own brand.
So, and speaking of brand,
did you like my segue?
I like that. One of the things that, a lot of people were thinking, okay, since Cyborg beat Holly Holm, they were saying, what's the next fight? Is it going to be Megan Anderson? But a lot of people are starting to talk about Amanda Nunes as her next opponent,
and it's looking more possible. Actually,
I was against this fight strictly because of the fact that the UFC is going too much to these super fights. there's too many belts being tied up. There's too many interim championships.
It's getting a little confusing in terms of who actually has the belt, who has two belts, can we just maybe figure this out a little bit more?
And I just think it makes the UFC look bad. But in this particular case, I think they don't really know what to do with Cyborg. And Cyborg originally said she didn't want to fight Amanda Nunes because she didn't want to fight another Brazilian fighter. She wanted to fight somebody in her own division because her division has been there, and her division has been here for a little while now, and there's pretty much like 3 or 4 people in her division completely.
Exactly.
And it's kind of like she's the plus size bantamweight champion in a way. And I don't mean that in an insult or disrespectful way, but the reason why I say she's the plus size is because she fights at a heavier weight, but all she's doing is fighting other bantamweights. Mm-hmm. And so even with this whole Amanda Nunes situation where, like I said, Cyborg said she didn't really want to fight another Brazilian fighter. And for the most part, Amanda Nunes has been on that same approach. But I was surprised that Amanda Nunes said she wanted this fight.
Mm-hmm. But then did you see, I was reading something online recently, why Cyborg is more willing now to take this fight?
All right, let me hear that. What did she say?
So she said that, originally she was a little more reluctant to take the fight, as you said, but then she has recently gone on record saying that she thinks Amanda Nunes needs this fight because her brand is weak and that she needs the money and the fame. And so it's like, but that Cyborg now makes it kind of sound like a charity case,
but she's not wrong. I agree with the statement that I think Amanda Nunes, who is a phenomenal fighter, has missed out on some really big opportunities. She should have got a big boost from fighting Miesha Tate, but she really didn't. When she beat Ronda Rousey, that should have made her a superstar. But she hasn't been able to, even though she's beaten some of the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, she hasn't become as big a bigger name. Like you look at Holly Holm, and Holly has been a phenomenal fighter, but her brand is, most people know her as the woman who beat Ronda Rousey. Mm-hmm. When I go around and I run into a lot of people who talk about MMA, and sometimes they refer to Amanda Nunes as, the other girl that beat Ronda. The other girl. Right. She's just the UFC bantamweight champion, but who's
beaten Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate.
Right.
And, a lot of other really tough fighters. It's not like she's just, accidentally beat Ronda Rousey one time.
A lot of times she's just known as the other girl who beat Ronda.
Right.
They don't remember everyone remembers Holly. Holly beat Ronda. Mm-hmm. But not a lot of people do not remember her. And so Cyborg is kind of right. This is, if she can beat Ronda, Miesha Tate, and Cyborg, if that doesn't boost her brand up, nothing will.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know if how hard she works at it either. I can't say anything because I don't know for sure. I do know, as much as I joke about Cyborg not lacking in opinion, she is really good at keeping her name out there and making sure that her brand stays relevant and recognizable. I don't know if Amanda does that.
No, I don't.
Much.
You know what? Amanda's very quiet at it, and I know Amanda has said that the UFC wants her to lose her title in so many words because she doesn't kind of have that name like a Ronda Rousey or a Holly Holm.
But would it be in her best interest to help herself in that case?
Well, a lot of fighters have a tough time, trying, it's just not in their nature to want to boast or to get into promotion. And that's not just the women, and men too.
I get it.
Yes.
Can you imagine if I were champion? Like I'd ever actually get in the ring or in the octagon. But can you imagine? I'd be the worst promoter of myself. So I get that. But, you gotta, I would hope that I would have people, or I would have you.
I would promote the hell out of myself.
I know you would. And I would hire you to promote the hell out of me.
Listen, I'd be in the UFC on a 5-fight winning streak, and you guys would think I had won 30 in a row.
I'm so sick of hearing about that Tate guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now, what else did you have with this fight? Did you have anything else that you wanted to add here?
Well, speaking of Cyborg and her social media presence and Megan Anderson, so they're having apparently a Twitter battle of sorts.
Okay, I kind of heard a little bit about this.
Yes.
Can you give me some clarification on this? Because,
well, as far as I can tell from the bit of reading that I did, that Megan Anderson has something going on. She's not really being terribly forthcoming about what that is. And, it's her personal life, so that's her prerogative. Cyborg has indicated that it is something to do with her visa. And in one tweet, she tagged, why can't I think of the immigration...
INS?
Yeah, she tagged them, and she said something. She alluded to Megan maybe having a fake marriage so that she could stay in the country. I mean, it was very snarky.
Cyborg is a really sweet person, and a great champion. She should have been champion in the UFC. I think she should have been champion in the UFC even before Ronda. But that was a very lowbrow move to do something where you're actually you're threatening someone's livelihood by tagging INS in a tweet.
She tagged U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I just wanted to make sure I said that correctly.
So it's kind of trying to get like Megan deported, which I think is kind of a crappy thing to do. Cyborg's better than that. Do you agree?
I do agree. And, just so that we are clear in our facts, Cyborg did become a U.S. citizen in 2016. So, she has gone through that process. But I
don't care if she's Citizen of the Year.
I'm just saying
she shouldn't have done that.
That still doesn't give her the right or the leg to stand on in terms of pointing fingers at someone else's process and their personal life and what's going on in terms of any of that. And to tag immigration services is just ridiculous.
Listen, I don't care if Trump made Cyborg Director of Finance and butt kicking. She should not have done that. That is
maybe she should be in charge of the wall.
I am staying away from that altogether.
That just means she could kick everyone's asses.
But I just think that is a very lowbrow thing to do. Cyborg is she's definitely better than that. I
agree.
I just don't like that one.
Yep.
And on that negative note, I think we should go and take another break.
I'm going to say a PSA before we go to our break, and that is tweet responsibly, people. Think before you tweet.
Or do the, like Herm Edwards said, don't push send. Take some time, and if you're going to say something negative about somebody, take like a minute. Like before you hit send, walk away for a minute and think about how it's going to affect you.
Or we can just go back to kindergarten. If you can't say something nice.
Oh, no, you can say some horrible crap. I'm okay with it. Just think about the actions of your words first. So, all right.
Oh, remind me not to let you teach kindergarten.
Little Billy, if he took your orange slices, kick his butt.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. We'll be right back. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the announcement and some of the other fights that are going to be going on at that UFC 223. All right, and we'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we're back, and in the last segment we were just talking about the possibility of Amanda Nunes versus Chris Cyborg, and we talked a little bit more about Chris Cyborg and her little Twitter battle with Megan Anderson. In the first segment we talked about Thug Rose versus Joanna Jedrzejczyk, and now we're going to talk about some of the things that have come up in the news. And when we're talking about, Rose and Joanna Jedrzejczyk at UFC 223, they also announced that Felice Herrig was going to be fighting. Who is she going to be fighting?
Oh, wait. I know this. Karolina Kowalkiewicz.
Karolina Kowalkiewicz.
I also just love to say Karolina Kowalkiewicz.
It is a nice name. I must admit.
It's got good alliteration, and it's one of the Polish names that's easier to pronounce once you know.
You know what? It is one of the most. It's one of the easiest Polish names to work with. I like this fight. This is the fight where, Felice Herrig has been trying to get a major fight for a long time.
Yes, she has.
Since she's finally broken into the top 10. She's now ranked number 9, and Karolina Kowalkiewicz, who is ranked number 4. This is the fight where I think if Felice Herrig was able to pull this off, this would get her a fight or two away from a title shot. This is also a really important fight for Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Oh, wow. Just talking about how easy Karolina Kowalkiewicz, because, she needs to be a big win puts her one fight. This fight here, she wins this one, she could easily be in a title picture, depending on what happens here with Joanna Jedrzejczyk versus Rose Namajunas. When you look at that women's strawweight division, you look around and you go, you got Rose as the champion. You have Joanna Jedrzejczyk as the number 1 contender. Jessica Andrade, which is number 2. Claudia Gadelha, which I think Claudia Gadelha is a stone cold beast in there. And even though she just lost to Jessica Andrade, I still say she's the toughest woman in that division. Then you got Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Tisha Torres is number 5. Carla Esparza is with her win, just put her, gets her right back she's getting right kind of in that title picture again. Former champ. Michelle Waterson is number 7. Cynthia Calvillo, who just lost to Carla Esparza. I thought she was going to be the one that was going to actually give Joanna the toughest situation.
We haven't talked about that fight. She was not happy when they made that announcement. Oh, my goodness.
No, she was not. She actually thought she won that fight against Carla Esparza, but the judges did not agree. I actually, even though I thought Cynthia Calvillo was actually the better fighter, I actually thought Carla Esparza won. And like I said, number 9 is Felice Herrig. And then number 10 is Alexa Grasso. So that's that top 10 in that strawweight division. So when you look at that Felice Herrig versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz situation, fight, it's not a situation, it's a fight. When you look at that, it's they're both right there as a possible, Karolina's one fight away, and Felicia's, I think, 2 fights away from being in the mix for a title shot. What about you? What's your thoughts?
I think it's going to be really interesting, and I agree. It's an important fight for both of them. That that obviously one of them's going to win and one of them's going to lose, but I'm trying to figure out. There are no losers. That's not right. I'm just trying to say that for whichever one of them wins, it's going to be a very good step for her. And I know that was kind of strange, but for some reason I cannot make my mouth make the words speak correctly.
Right. And and it's one of those situations where when you look at the situation, when you look at this fight, and if you look at Karolina Kowalkiewicz and you look at her last 4 fights, she came off of, first off, she actually beat Rose. So she beat Rose to get her title shot against Joanna Jedrzejczyk. And then she lost to Claudia Gadelha. And so, she's right there.
Something interesting in terms of this division and Karolina Kowalkiewicz, did you see that she was asked about the Rose Joanna fight?
I did see something about that. Fill us in.
Well, she said that she is rooting for Rose, that she thinks that Rose is a really good fighter and that she wants Rose to win. But then she said that she also wants Rose to win basically because she does not think Joanna is a good person. And she said she knows that they're countrywomen and that she should support Joanna because they are both from the same country, but she just cannot, and she is going with Rose all the way.
Okay. The thing about Joanna is she's next level. And reason why I say this is when I say next level, you look around and she's intimidating in the ring, but she will intimidate you next level outside the ring. A big part of Joanna Jedrzejczyk's game is the mental warfare. Like with Rose, she talks about the boogeyman. The boogie woman's coming to get you. The boogie woman's coming to get you. And I think it was either like Joe Rogan podcast or something like that. She runs into Rose right before the fight, and she says, "Did you get your ticket yet?" And then she just walks away, and her and Rose's boyfriend are trying to figure out, like, what the heck is she talking about? She gets in your head, and she breaks you down mentally, and that's part of her game. Like with Ronda's game was Ronda didn't talk to anybody in the back. She'd be backstage. She'd have that snarl on her face, and she'd just walk around backstage and everyone would be afraid to talk to her. Well, Joanna has taken it to the next level. She's playing chess with everyone, and she's a couple of moves ahead. And that's part of her game. And when you're done fighting, it doesn't bury those bad feelings. I remember when you looked at Ultimate Fighter, when she was going against Claudia Gadelha, it was constant mind game after mind game, needling, getting in your face. It was about beating her opponent before they ever get to the ring, and so that's part of the reason why I think is why Karolina Kowalkiewicz still has kind of bad feelings or bitter feelings about her experience with her, even though it's a fellow countrywoman. Would that be the proper way to say it? Countrywoman,
yeah.
It's supposed to be, it's like countrymen, but when you hear the word countrywoman, it's kind of like, I'm picturing Ellie Mae.
You were thinking more along the lines of, I don't know, Reba McEntire.
Yes, I'm thinking when you say country woman, it's just a, as she's making, apple fritters in the backyard.
I could go for an apple fritter.
No, it is too late for anything. I'm going to do this show and we're out of here. Anything else? What else are we going to cover? What else we got in the news?
We've got plenty of things to talk about. I've just been looking at, I'm telling you, Cyborg is everywhere. Like whenever I go looking for UFC news, Cyborg pops up.
What else do you have for Cyborg?
Well, so Invicta, not often people actually... Most people don't ask for a Cyborg fight. Most people try to avoid Cyborg fights.
Right.
But Joanna Kunitskaya actually said she's going to the 145 weight class and she would like to fight Cyborg. What do you think of that?
Joanna Kunitskaya is actually a really tough fighter. I think it's a smart move. She's a fighter who I don't think she could beat Cyborg. But I think it would be a fight that I'd be interested in seeing. She's a very tough lady. She's that fighter that every time I see her, I feel like she gets better and better in the ring. I think about her when she fought Tanya Evinger, and she had a controversial win over Tanya Evinger, which was then reversed. But she's a tough lady, and I give her a lot of credit for how she fought against Tanya the second time, even though Tanya was a little too much for her. I just think Cyborg I admire her for being the one that wants to jump in the ring with Cyborg, but I just don't, I think Cyborg's too much for everyone.
But she needs more people in that division. She's got to fight someone. So if there's people willing to come into that division to fight her, more power to them.
And Cyborg said it best. Not only do you need opponents for Cyborg, but in order to build a division, you got to have opponents fighting each other. Like Anna Kunitskaya versus Megan Anderson. Or Megan Anderson versus Charmaine Tweed.
Right. It can't just be Cyborg having championship fight after defending her title. Obviously, she has to keep defending that title, but she can't be the entire division. Just
it bugs me. When you go through and you go to the UFC website and you go down and you say women's featherweight division, you look for the rankings. And it just says no ranking available. That just looks bad.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, they don't even list Cyborg.
I was just going to say, couldn't they at least put Cyborg in as champion?
Like Cyborg 1, Megan Anderson 2, Holly Holm 3, Jermaine Duranamy 4.
Something.
But when you look at it, Jermaine Duranamy, bantamweight. Holly Holm, bantamweight. Kat Zingano, bantamweight. Amanda Nunes, bantamweight. Ronda Rousey, bantamweight. Tanya Evinger, you're right, bantamweight. Cyborg is right that they need to develop the division, and Cyborg needs to be fighting people in her division.
Correct.
And one of the things I do respect is that she said, she kind of wants to leave the division. She wants to leave a legacy behind, and part of that is building that division. There was no one in the bantamweight division before Ronda Rousey, but they eventually built that division, and that division is an amazing division now. There's so many great fighters in the bantamweight division, but once upon a time there was no one. Mm-hmm. But now there, from Valentina Shevchenko, Holly Holm, Juliana Pena, Raquel Pennington, Jermaine Duranamy, Kat Zingano, Sarah McMahon, so that division has been built out because they brought people in, they started fighting, and you started knowing who these people are. The UFC has to do something about this.
I agree.
Okay, so we're going to move on. A couple weeks ago, we also had Jessica Rose Clark defeating Paige Van Zandt.
Yes.
And both of these guys actually ended up in the news.
Yes.
Which do you want to talk about first?
Well, let's talk about the fight first because that happened first.
Well, actually, I'm gonna overrule you. Not that I can't
Don't
overrule
ask
you.
me.
I'm just gonna say a little quick blurb in there. Even Paige lost, but congratulations, she just got engaged.
Yes, that just came out today, a few hours ago. So
Right.
congratulations to Paige and her fiance.
So Paige just got engaged. But then what I want to talk about is Jessica Rose Clark, who actually beat Paige. But one of the things, talk about, it's tough enough to fight someone, to mentally be ready. We were just talking about how Joanna Jedrzejczyk and the mental war, and it's just really tough to be, when you get in a fight, you have to be mentally ready. And my heart went out to Jessica Rose Clark, because right before she went into to have the fight,
yeah.
yes.
See, I blocked this. This is why
I don't even blame you. Right before she went to go fight Paige Van Zandt, she found out that someone had broken into her house and had stole all her stuff. And then on top of that, she had a cat, and the people, when they broke in her house, apparently they attacked her cat to the point where she actually had to put her cat down. What a horrible situation. What kind of person would actually break? First off, you're a lowbrow person just for breaking into someone's house, but to harm their cat as well. It's not like this was this big giant guard cat that was gonna, it wasn't
Right.
Heathcliff or someone like that.
We assume not, but yeah, that's just. I can't even form words. I can't believe that you brought this up because I can't even form words.
Oh
about
no,
it.
I remember when I told you that
horrifying.
it was just like, that was that's a very tough thing to really to hurt someone's pet. So
I'm going to lighten up the mood just a tiny bit because you almost feel bad for Paige in this situation, because if I were Jessica Rose Clark, I would have just been picturing the face of whoever just hurt my cat. And
that's probably why she beat. That's why she beat Paige
won.
down. Another thing about Jessica Rose Clark that I have learned is talking about that. It was kind of like she had a little animosity toward Paige after the fight, but she said, she really didn't have anything to say about Paige that was bad. It was just that Paige's fans just made her really just want to get at Paige, and she compared Paige's fans to a cult, and that that she had never received so many bad tweets and messages against her from before the fight all the way through the win. And that she's still getting messages right now.
And trash talk is one thing, and it's part of every sport. That's fine, but come on, people. I realize that the internet makes it so much easier to just say whatever you feel like it, but you can support a fighter without telling another fighter you wish they would die. Like, can we stop telling people we wish they would die?
Did they really tell her that?
I don't know that. But I'm going to guess that at least one person said, you should kill yourself. Because somebody always says that.
Now, see, I don't quite remember exactly what was said.
I'm not saying that somebody did say that. But people are always saying some variation on that when they're mad on the internet. And let's stop it.
Yes, I mean, there's just too much of that.
This is my, again, with the PSA. Stop hurting people's cats and stop telling people to hurt themselves.
Yeah, no hurting the cats. Let's just no hurting cats either.
That's very difficult.
All right, and so
I think we should take our final break and come back and talk about that book.
Right, that's what I was just going to say. Is that we are going to talk about the book. Let's see. Also, isn't there a couple more things? Let's see. We're trying to think if there's other things that are going on.
I'm sure there are.
We got. Let's see. I think there's some Ronda Rousey news, and some Michelle Watterson stuff that's going on. And I mean, when you talk about Ronda Rousey, I'm just waiting on WrestleMania for Ronda to start. Getting ready for WrestleMania.
When is that? I don't keep track enough.
I think WrestleMania is like March or April.
So coming up.
That's supposed to be the big surprise is Ronda Rousey's gonna...
It's supposed to be a surprise?
Well, I think it's supposed to be a surprise, but it's not. I don't think it's pretty well kept. But anyway, that about covers everything. When we come back, we have a special treat for you. What are we going to be talking about?
Well, we will be speaking with author Alistair Hendrie about his book, The Fight Game, The Untold Story of Women's MMA in Britain. And so when we come back, I'll give you a little bit more about what the book's about, and then we'll jump to that interview.
All right, stay tuned, and we'll be back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Women's MMA podcast. As we mentioned before the break, we are going to be speaking with author Alistair Hendrie about his book, Fight Game, The Untold Story of Women's MMA in Britain. Before we get to that interview, we sat down with him today and Skyped with him from his home in the UK. But before I get to that interview, I do want to give you a little bit more information on the book. As I mentioned, it is Fight Game, The Untold Story of Women's MMA in Britain by Alistair Hendrie. And the blurb on that is, when Rosie Sexton fought Alexis Davis in 2013, she made history and became the first British woman to compete in the UFC. Fight Game reveals how Britain's female fighters broke down barriers, offering interviews from stars such as Sexton and the UFC's Joanna Calderwood. With its intimate take on the growth of the scene, landmark moments, and the personalities within the sport, Fight Game is an inspiring tale of dedication, sacrifice, and ultimately acceptance. Again, that is the description of Fight Game, the untold story of women's MMA in Britain. And Tate and I sat down with the author, Alistair Hendrie, today to talk about that book and why he decided to write it and who he spoke with, etc. So without further ado, let's turn to that interview. Hi, Alistair. Welcome to the podcast. It's wonderful to speak to you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This is my co-host, Tate.
How's it going there, my friend?
Yeah, very good, very good. You?
We're doing pretty good. We before we started this, we had a little some technical difficulties, as you know. So I'm just happy to be able to have you on.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought we weren't gonna make it at one point, but I got there in the end.
Yeah, we made it through the tough times. Now we're ready to roll.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool, good stuff.
So we are here to actually talk about your book, Fight Game. Mm-hmm. But before we do that, I would love for our listeners just to get to know you a little bit. So if there's anything that you're comfortable sharing, we'd love to hear that.
Yeah, so I'm basically a freelance MMA reporter. I live in Reading in the UK, and I got into MMA probably about maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. So really not too long ago. I got into it after a friend of mine told me about the Ultimate Fighter series between Tito Ortiz and Ken Shamrock. And as I was saying before we were on air, at the time I thought. I was like, what, Ken Shamrock? The professional wrestling guy, the world's most dangerous man. I had no idea what MMA was, no idea about the UFC. So I was kind of aware of it. And then after my parents bought ESPN in our house, I kind of stumbled across the UFC again. I recorded a couple of fights, and I was kind of putting off watching it for a while. I just kept forgetting to watch it. And in the end, the first fight that I watched was, I think it was the first fight between Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva, and I was just hooked straight away. Just the finish was incredible, and I was saying before, it felt like no one in the arena wanted Anderson Silva to win. You know, if you told me that this guy was, you know, the greatest MMA fighter of all time back then, I'd have said, well, you don't really seem to be that popular, but you know, it's just funny when you kind of come into the sport and know nothing about it. So yeah, I do a lot of writing in my spare time. I'm really not what you'd call a full-time journalist or anything like that. I've got a standard 9-to-5 day job, but I love MMA. I've got a big passion for MMA, and that's of course where the book came from, really.
Okay. Thank you for that. So go ahead and tell us about the fight game. Just give us a bit of an overview of the book.
So the book, Fight Game: The Untold Story of Women's MMA in Britain, it was a funny one. It kind of came a little bit out of nowhere, really. So just to give a bit of background to the book, I've essentially covered a bit of a background and the development of the women's scene in the UK. So I've spoken to every female fighter of note pretty much in the UK, apart from one or two. So I've interviewed Rosie Sexton, Joanne Calderwood, Daniel West, going right back to the likes of Lisa Hygo, Kelly Salone as well. And I spoke to them all and covered how the scene got going, how they got fights, perceptions of the sport. And I've also tried to take it right up to the present day and interviewed the likes of Kate Jackson, Kerry Hughes, Joanne Calderwood as well. And yeah, it's something I'm really, really proud of. And I think that the nice thing is that I think I've managed to profile both the private and professional lives of the fighters as well, because they're, I mean, as you both know, they're such interesting characters. I mean, for example, I spoke to a lady called Wendy McKenna, who's I think she had a few amateur fights with Cage Warriors and has recently turned pro. And I mean, she's got an incredible background. She was in the army in Northern Ireland, and now her daughter, Corey McKenna, is now one of Britain's probably best amateurs, and she's looking at turning pro now with Cage Warriors. Apart from that, I also spoke to Danielle West, who's got an incredible story. You know, she grew up in America, ran away from home when she was a child, and she was kind of in and out of care homes, and then in the end, she kind of relocates to Britain and finds herself fighting Rin Nakai, who was one of the biggest names in the sport in Japan. So, yeah, there's a lot of really, really cool stories in there. I'm really pleased to have kind of brought it full circle. I spoke to a guy called Ian Dean, who's one of the real prominent figures in UK MMA, Cage Warriors matchmaker. And I spoke at great length with him about the women's divisions. So, and I also kind of tried to bring it to the present day as well and speak to the likes of Helen Harper and Brian E. Terrell, who are both coming through at the moment. And another thing, I also tried to, I also wrote a lot about the social perceptions and the connotations of the sport in the media. So, for example, I think a lot of media in this country don't really understand MMA or women's MMA, or that they're not as aware of it as they should be. So I've kind of tried to shed a bit of light on that. And yeah, it's something I'm really pleased of. So I'd love if people went out and gave it a read and gave me their thoughts. I'd be delighted to hear anyone's thoughts on it, to be honest.
Now, you know, I'm a big fan of women's MMA. That's one of the reasons why I was super excited about having you on. But even when you look at whole, even some of the other journalists out there, a lot of times, a lot of the top journalists will skip over the women's MMA genre pretty much, and primarily stick to men, which I've always thought is a big mistake, because I always think the women always steal the show, especially on UFC events. And wouldn't it have been easier to do a book about, let's say, like Michael Bisping or Dan Harding or someone like that instead of the women? I mean, I appreciate the fact that you did the book on women, because I think they don't get enough, enough PR. So what was your thought into picking women over the bigger names?
Because it's something which just hasn't been done, I'm absolutely stunned that there's not more books about just women's combat sports in general. For example, I've kind of searched on Amazon and a couple of websites. I mean, if anyone knows any more, do let me know. But I think there's an American one called She's a Knockout, and there's really not that many other books about women's combat sports. I mean, I know, of course, Ronda Rousey and Nicola Adams and women like that have written biographies. But in terms of, a journalistic book from an educational perspective, there's really not that much. Plus, I think it'd be extremely difficult for me to get access to Michael Bisping. I mean, even though I've met him once or twice, he's so down to earth. He's exactly like he is on when he's in front of the cameras. But I think I'd rather do something which is a little bit untold, a little bit left field, and it's something I'm really, really pleased with. And I think the other thing about this is that we're at a time now where women's fighting is becoming a lot more accepted. If you look over history, even from the Stone Ages and the Dark Ages and World Wars, way back when it was always men fighting. But now in the modern era, we're seeing women in combat sports, and I think it's a really, really good thing, because I think, especially at a time when, because of stuff like Instagram and social media these days, it's like there seems to be a little bit of society where women have to kind of worry about being feminine or beautiful or whatever you might have, whereas I kind of wanted to say that MMA should be a sport for everyone, regardless of the gender, and that women can take up combat sports. And I think, as well as that, in Britain, we have shown that with Rosie Sexton, Joanne Calderwood. Even aside from that, we had Jade Jones, who I think won an Olympic gold medal in Taekwondo in London. And we also had, again, Nicola Adams, who's had phenomenal success. She's turned pro now, and BT Sport in the UK have got her fights. So I kind of just wanted to say, women's MMA is here, and it's a big thing, and I wanted to give a bit of background to it, and I hope I did that.
All right.
So what would you say to someone who would say that the women's fights are just not as good as the men's fight? You hear that all the time.
And I disagree with that, by the way.
I do too, but people say it all the time.
Yes,
that they
I
just
agree
don't
with
think
you. Yes.
the women's fights are as exciting or as powerful or as good. What would you say to them?
Well, it's an interesting one, because Kerry Hughes said to me, I think women's fights are more interesting because, with all due respect, if the level is a little bit lower, it's a bit more equal. And I think the thing is, women's MMA is still developing. If you look at, Nunes against Rousey, Tate against Zingano, Gina Serrano against Cyborg, those are three of really the most exciting MMA fights you'll ever see. Even Sexton and Ashlyn Daly, that was an incredible fight back in, I think it was about 2010 to 2011. There was barely any striking, but it was one of the best fights I've ever seen. So I think you're always going to get detractors. It's crazy right now. I mean, some of the biggest names in the sport have said that they're not a fan of women's MMA, but it's crazy really, because even though we're in 2017, there is still that kind of element of, not like sexism, but I think we still do live in quite a misogynistic society in some ways. And things like sexism and racism and all those kind of things, I think you're always going to have people who unfortunately do keep bringing these things to the table. So you've just got to give it a chance, really. I know MMA is obviously traditionally a male-dominated sport, but you've seen over the last few years, I mean, even forgetting the likes of Tate and Rousey, women like even people like Raquel Pennington, Juliana Pena, these fighters are really some of the best in the world. So, I mean, women can fight just as well as the men, and I think they should, they should definitely be seen as, equal in coverage and everything, really.
Right. Great. Yeah.
So what kind of research did you do for the book? I mean, obviously I've read it, so I know you talked to several fighters, but talk about your process for the research.
Yeah, it was really, really, it kind of just snowballed really. So I did the interview with Rosie Sexton, and after that I interviewed Laura O'Brien Howarth, Lisa Hygo, a few others as well, and it just snowballed from there really. So I would literally spend hours and hours and hours just watching fights on YouTube, researching on Sherdog, messaging people on Facebook to speak to me. I think the really, really nice thing was that I think pretty much everyone who I messaged on Facebook actually kind of replied to me to speak to the book. So that was really, really cool. But yeah, I mean, it was an incredibly long process. There were many, many, many times where I thought this book isn't going to work out. I think I probably tried to interview Calderwood for about between like a year and 18 months unsuccessfully. Because I think this was actually before she was in the UFC. So literally, like, I contacted her gym, I contacted her Twitter, her Facebook, and yeah, it was because I was just thinking, like, I really can't write the book without Britain's most well-known fighter. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the research, it was really, really nice because I got to find out so much about women like Danielle West and a woman called Kelly Salone. It was so funny because she actually owns a cycling brand now, which essentially makes kind of cycling wear for women. And I was Googling her name, and she was all I could find. And I digged a little bit deeper, and I thought, oh, it's the same person. So yeah, I think she had two fights. I think she had one amateur and one pro fight in around 2001, 2002. So I got to speak to her, and she was, yeah, really, really funny, really, really approachable. And I think that was one of the really, really awesome things because I got to expand my knowledge of MMA so greatly, and it never really felt like a chore. Although it was such a long, arduous process in places, and the amount of proofreading that I had to do on my own as well was quite sort of gargantuan at times, really. So yeah, I mean, if anyone out there was looking to write a book, it's a lot of work, but yeah, it's a very rewarding and enjoyable process in the long run.
Now, you mentioned Joanne Calderwood, and one of the big things, a lot of people in the States don't realize how popular she is in the UK. Especially when you listen to her and you listen to her voice, and she has that kind of that little, I don't want to say it sound rude, but it's a very soft voice.
Yeah,
but then
she's
this beast in the ring. Talk about her popularity.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the thing about Joanne is that when I was in Glasgow, she was probably the most popular fighter there, probably on the same level as Bisping. I actually retweeted a picture of the line to interview her at the media day in Glasgow when she fought Courtney Casey, and it literally like snaked all over the room. And I think the thing about a lot of personalities in British MMA, you get the brash guys like Bisping and Paul Daly, those kind of guys. But then you also get, Rosie Sexton and Joanne Calderwood, who are both just so sort of down to earth. You'd never think in a million years after speaking to either of them, if you knew nothing about MMA, you wouldn't think they were fighters at all. They just completely buck stereotypes. And I think the thing about Joanne is that I think you could definitely see it in her Invicta fights. I mean, she's such an exciting fighter to watch. She's got everything. She's got knees up the middle, the teat kicks. And I think Joanne Calderwood is a really, really good example of where British women's MMA is at. I mean, we're kind of, our very best fighter could kind of get like top 10 in the UFC. But after that, it's a bit of a glass ceiling, I think, unfortunately. And I think Calderwood's got to the point where she can't, smash people with her Muay Thai skills like she could in Invicta and Cage Warriors. Don't get me wrong, she's an outstanding fighter, but she had a very close fight with Calvillo a couple of months ago, and right. You just think, if that was before the UFC, maybe she would have won that, landslide on points. But having said that, she's lost to real world class girls. I mean, Jessica Andrade is an absolute beast. even though she's one of those fighters who just manages to look incredibly small, whatever weight class she competes in. Yeah, I mean, if you saw her fight against Courtney Casey, she really ran through her and really snatched the decision in the end. That third round was, she almost kind of took the decision out of the judges' hands there. But I think she's just incredibly humble, and I think she's got a really cool backstory. It's quite funny because Bryony Terrell, who I profiled in the book, works as a nurse. Kerry Hughes, who I profiled in the book, works in the police, and Joanne Caldwell also used to work in nursing as well. So I think it's really, really cool how these a lot of these women come from very kind of respectable jobs. So it just shows that it is a sport for all walks of life. And I think, Joanne Caldwell, she's got that kind of like human element as well, because she has, had like everyday jobs and that kind of thing. And she's gone out to TriStar to really make it work. And I think she probably needs a good win or two now behind under her belt now. But she's definitely one of the most popular fighters in Britain.
Now, you mentioned the fact that, the British fighters, they can get almost, it's kind of like a little bubble there where they can get to the top 10. They can get almost to the top 10, but they just can't get over the hump. But then you look at some of like the Polish fighters who are just breaking in everywhere. Why is there such a difference? In your opinion, that's your opinion.
It's, do you know what? It's so difficult. I'd really, really love to be able to tell you, but I think generally, apart from Bisping, really in the last kind of 5 years, we've just struggled to have anyone who can kind of get over the line. So, for example, you had Dan Hardy who had the fight with GSP, but he obviously went a bit off the ball and had those 3 losses towards the end of his career. I know Brad Pickett and Ross Pearson have been very much kind of win-loss. Brad's obviously retired now, but I know he was kind of struggling for a bit of consistency. But of course, that's no kind of disrespect to any of those guys, because they were legends of British MMA. But yeah, I mean, in terms of Polish MMA, I think it's really, really blowing up out there. I'd love to be able to tell you, why there's been such an explosion of Polish MMA at the moment. And I think because a lot of them are actually training in America, so maybe that's the way to go. I know Jan Blachowicz is doing good things at the moment. They've obviously got Jedrzejczyk and Omielanchuk, and I mean, KSW are doing incredible things as well. And I know M1, I think they have a lot of shows in Poland. So yeah, I'd love to be able to say why a country like Poland is producing these stars, but it's a little bit like when someone like Ngannou steps up to Miocic. So, for example, Ngannou was knocking everyone out, absolutely everyone.
Yes.
Then when he comes up against someone who knew has incredible wrestling, like Miocic, he gets found out. And I think that's the thing. MMA is still a young sport. There are levels to it. And I think Britain 100% were at a disadvantage in terms of ground game and grappling and wrestling, because it's so ingrained in American culture. But at the same time, we've got a lot of young guys coming up. Arnold Allen is absolutely incredible. And Nathaniel Wood in Cage Warriors is doing great things as well. So I couldn't tell you why Polish fighters are kind of on the rise at the moment, but I think it just depends on the kind of training that you can get. And I think for British fighters, you kind of need to go out to America. So I know a lot of our guys have gone out to American Top Team and those kind of places. So yeah, I think it's just a case of doing that and then taking it to the next level, really.
All right.
So you mentioned in the book a little bit about how women's sports don't seem to be covered as well as men's sports in the UK. How there just is kind of this disconnect. Do you see that at all as part of why women, or even MMA fighters in general, don't get the rankings, or don't
because of their popularity, they don't get the bigger fights, they don't get the notoriety.
Do you see any connection between those?
I think in terms of rankings and that kind of thing, I'm not too sure if there's any correlation in terms of that. But yeah, in terms of in terms of whether or not the media could push British fighters more. I think 100% they could. I think, and it's a bit sad really, because if you look at people like Kate Jackson, who's a very humble, respectful fighter, she's one where it kind of pains me to say it, but if she kind of trash talked a bit more and had a bit of a bigger profile, then maybe she would have been in the UFC by now. I mean, she's doing great things. She just fought Valerie Letourneau in Bellator, but I think the media could be doing a lot more. I think in terms of coverage, the BBC, I just don't really think their coverage is there right now. I think it's the same in terms of the Times as well, the Guardian as well. I think the Guardian, they seem to kind of ignore MMA and unless it's something about Michael Bisping. I mean, having said that, the BBC have just got a podcast come out with Dan Hardy and a few other British journalists, which is really, really good. So, yeah, it's heading in the right direction, but I definitely think the media could be doing more. But I think in terms of women's sports in general, this country, the coverage is actually really good. BT Sport, who are one of the main broadcasters here, do plenty to sort of big up women's sport in Britain. And one of our tennis players, Joanna, just got to the semi-finals of Wimbledon, and yeah, she's blowing up as well. So obviously we know all about the likes of Nicola Adams as well, and I think historically we've had the likes of Jessica Ennis-Hill in athletics. So yeah, I think generally the coverage of women's sport in Britain is it's okay. It's definitely getting there, but I think we need to do more to show the likes of the BBC and the Times that there's more to MMA than Conor McGregor. So yeah.
Sure.
And you can't talk MMA anymore without mentioning Conor McGregor.
Oh no, you can't. You really can't.
I do want to thank our guest, Alistair Hendrie, for joining us to talk about his book, Fight Game. And if you think that interview ended rather abruptly, you would be correct, because as we mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, we had issues with Skype today. I can't even tell you how many issues we had. So we apologize to Alistair. We thank him for his immense patience with us as we went through those technical difficulties. He's really a great guy, and he was so patient and so kind about all of those issues. And I don't know if it was the internet, if it was our system, if it was his system, if the universe just did not want us to talk about women's MMA with Alistair today. But we did get the 23 minutes of the interview, and you get a good idea about what his book is about. We weren't able to get the part that he wanted us to talk about his website, and he's got a couple of things that he wanted us to mention, so I'm going to make sure that I do that because I said that I would. And those things are that he has written a feature on Bryony Tyrell and Cyborg versus Anderson recently, and those are on his website. Also, he has an excerpt from the book with Rosie Sexton discussing training at SBG Manchester. So if you're interested a little bit more in the book, you can go to Alistair's website for that excerpt, as well as his features on Bryony Tyrell and Cyborg versus Anderson. His website is Hendrie, Hendrie, Hendrie Sports Journal, hendriesportsjournal.blogspot.co.uk, and then you can find the excerpt, and that is under Rosie Sexton discusses humble beginnings. So that's a very long URL. I will put that in the notes of this episode so that you can see it. You can also find all of his other writings on his website, so you can see that. He also wanted us to mention that you can now get the book on Kindle through Amazon, but you don't need a Kindle to read it. He wanted us to make sure that you knew that the app is free on all platforms. So you can get it through Kindle through Amazon on Kindle, but you do not have to have a Kindle to read it. So once again, we thank our guest, Alistair Hendrie, for joining us. We encourage you to go check out his book, go check out his website, and we hope to have him on the show again and have fewer technical issues. Thank you so much for joining us as we discussed women's MMA and things that have happened, things that are coming up, all of the news that's going on in this exciting sport. We hope you will join us again next time. But as always, in the meantime, you can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and any app that you use to download podcasts. You can download our podcast anywhere. You can find us at www.gsmcpodcast.com, and you can follow us on social media. We would love to hear from you and interact with you on social media. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. In the meantime, hope you had a great weekend. Hope you enjoyed some great MMA, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Women's Mixed Martial Arts Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.